you're going to do it, the audit should be worth it. The problem is, audits are hard. Yet we've issued over 20,000 reports to 2,000 clients worldwide.
If you don't give your technical team enough resources to do the work, then that standard will never exist.
Cybersecurity and compliance will no longer be a mystery.
Hey everybody, welcome on into our cybersecurity mission. My name is Allie Krings. I'll be your host, and today I'm super excited to sit down with Shannon Lane, one of the lead practitioners here with Kirkpatrick Price. Shannon, thanks for sitting down with us.
Oh, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You know, it's really exciting to kick off this podcast, start diving into these topics that people want to know more about, but it's complicated to get that information. So first, let's talk about you and walk me through how you found yourself as a lead practitioner.
When I became an external auditor, that came after sort of a fascination with cybersecurity that grew late in an information technology career.
Okay.
So I was an IT director and worked with various individuals in the IT space, and then ended up with a bet from a friend about passing the CISSP, and then
Well, how did that actually start? Because I don't think many people actually bet on that.
No, we were working for a large healthcare provider at the time, and the two of us had just gone through a merger. And following the merger, we've always been really good friends. We had a very big conversation about where was our career going to go? What are we going to do? We'd kind of hit the top of our bar. Between the merger and being on the smaller side of the merger, as a lot of folks have experienced, when you are on the back side of a merger, sometimes your upward mobility stalls.
Okay.
And so we were kind of staring that into the face, getting older, looking at our careers and going, okay, so what next? And he walked into the office and literally looked me dead in the eye and said, Shannon, I'm going to pass my CISSP before you do. And I went, no, you're not. What's a CISSP?
Okay, good start.
Yeah. And it turned into what amounted to about a half-day conversation where we literally got no work done. Sorry, AJ. But where we literally got no work done at all, and we talked about what the future was going to be. And at the time, we were really looking at cybersecurity was really taking off as a field. We were really looking at it in that particular space. And it ended up where, for the record, we still haven't paid off this bet.
Oh, wait, so who won?
That's the problem. See, I actually physically got my CISSP before him, but he did pass the test before I did. But my number is lower than his. So we just have never paid off this particular bet. It's just been one of those things, it's a constant argument.
Okay, so it's like one of those things that's driving a wedge between you guys.
No.
Oh, okay, cool. So everything's fine.
We're fine.
Everything is great.
But we ended up, both of us got our CISSPs, and we went back to the management of the organization we were with and said, well, we got our CISSP, we'd like to join the cybersecurity organization.
Sure.
They went, that's nice.
Okay.
And so we started looking for other positions outside of it. Both of us fell into audit. He works with the DoD doing audit work on that side of the fence, and I went into the private sector, working with Kirkpatrick Price and doing external audit in that particular space. And over the years, I became more and more fascinated with it. And so with a lot of external study and with a lot of additional work, I really pulled down all of these cybersecurity concepts. I became fascinated with frameworks.
Okay.
And I became fascinated with how do we communicate cybersecurity to other organizations? And one thing led to another, and I looked up one day and I was getting offered a lead practitioner role here in the organization.
Well, and it's been really exciting, and especially the work that Kirkpatrick Price has done now with over 20,000 reports, over 2,000 clients worldwide. It's so exciting just to talk about it. And matter of fact, I know Joseph Kirkpatrick reached out to you and said, hey, we're going to go through this podcast. I want you to pick a topic that you're really excited about. And one of the topics that came up was configuration management. So I want to start from the very top here. What is configuration management?
Something only auditors get excited about. No, I kid. Configuration management is the idea, what's the best way to describe it? It's the idea that you have to know what you're securing in order to secure it. And one of the things you absolutely must know is how you're going to build and maintain and manage the environment that everyone is working in.
Okay.
It's not just that you have to have computers. You have to understand what's on every computer, how every computer is built, how you're going to use those computers to drive a business process.
Wow.
And configuration management is the very broad vertical that deals with all of those topics, the people, process, and technology around maintaining your environment and its systems in a way that drives your business forward.
You know, it's been interesting too, because once you know about it, you really start to see this in the news and what's happening topically. So one example of this is when you think of, you know, the car company Toyota, they had a 10-year misconfiguration that led to a lot of this information being left publicly. Walk us through, you know, what happens and how does a, you know, misconfiguration like that even occur?
It's far be it from me to speak specifically about the Toyota issue in detail. I don't have a lot of background information on that, but anytime you see a long-term breach like that in an organization, it usually comes down to the fact that when it was originally built, back in the day when they put it all together, it was put together in the moment with expedience for business practice. And no thought was given to how are we going to maintain it long term? How are we going to ensure that it is secure? How are we going to test it? How do we grow it? And those initial misconfigurations just sort of get stuck. Nobody wrote it down, nobody managed it, and it sticks in the organization for years and years and years until it actually becomes a problem. And then it's just sort of lost to the annals of time. How did they come up with it to begin with? What was the original root cause is sort of lost. But those long-term breaches are generally about the idea of there was a misconfiguration early, very little consideration was given to the ramifications of that misconfiguration. It was never recorded and never caught.
And so walk us through, as an auditor, how do you go about, you know, identifying those misconfigurations? How does it even come about?
You have to have a certain amount of expertise in the various systems that are involved. It's never as simple as push button, get answer.
We can only wish it was, right?
Yes, I wish. Essentially, you have to follow business processes to locate where this sensitive data is stored, where these things are that you need to protect. And then you have to examine the configurations around each one of the elements of those systems to make sure that each piece of the puzzle is configured as it should be. Now, it's usually done in stages. We'll do, say, network, and then we'll focus on devices, and then we'll focus on cloud configurations, and then we focus on storage configurations. But even things like paying attention to the scope of a penetration test is key. Things like, not that I can, you know, again, I can't speak exactly for it, but things like the Toyota hack can often be caught if, the Toyota breach can often be caught if a penetration test has an appropriate scope. We know that they were penetration testing their systems. So then the question becomes is, how was it missed? What's the root cause in the missing of that misconfiguration on top of what was the misconfiguration to begin with?
And why was it missed for such a long period of time? You know, I think it was really kind of comical when you read articles like this. It always ends with, immediate action was taken.
And immediately
10 years.
closed. Well, and that should go to tell you that while an individual configuration is easy, like any one vertical line item, I want to remove access to this S3 bucket in Amazon, or I want to remove public access to a website. Any single individual action is easy. That's not the problem. The problem is the coherent build of the technical control such that you took those actions at the right time. So in this particular case, that misconfiguration just existed until it was found. And there will always be errors. This was a particularly egregious error. We are human after all, there will always be errors. But the technical oversight likely never included the concept that those could be publicly viewable.
Well, you bring up a really good point. You know, we are human. We are prone to make mistakes, right? With that being said, how do we, you know, create a standard or create a process where people can limit those mistakes?
For me, when I try to train clients and internal auditors on that concept, what I want to focus on is the idea that an organization has to do business. And then we take that business and we apply these external frameworks where thankfully these wheels have already been invented. We don't have to reinvent a lot of these wheels. And we use those frameworks to help guide our decision making into what that process should shape up to be. So when it comes to things like configuration management as a whole, you begin with understanding what it is you're trying to do and what you have to use to get there. And I don't mean, am I going to be using a particular kind of computer? It's more along the lines of, I need patient data.
Okay.
We need enough compute to be able to show the patient data like this. I want a patient to be able to log in and see. These ideas of building a
Yep.
good specification for the process you want to build is right at its core.
Yep.
This creates what we internally call a data flow document,
Okay.
which kind of leads this particular process. We know we have scary data. We know we're
Absolutely.
going to use it in this path. We're going to follow this flow chart. And then we simply step in and begin securing each piece of that path. Once you've identified everywhere that data is allowed to exist, we begin
Yeah.
securing every location where that data is. That becomes a risk assessment. We do risk modeling based on each step of that data flow.
Right.
This particular system is on the public network edge, therefore it has the following threats. Here are the things we need to guard against. Oh, by the way, since it's on the network edge, are we publicly revealing the data?
Right.
How can we be sure we're not? We have to ask those questions as we build out the system.
You know, it really goes back to this idea with Kirkpatrick Price that audits are really, really hard. For a lot of companies, it's intimidating, it's really scary, it's a big challenge to put it, all up to the test. Walk us through why these are so critical to do regularly and how you can, by doing these audits, you can help prevent making those mistakes.
Well, the advantage of an audit is not necessarily the perfection of the auditor. It really is the external eyes. Another person taking apart your business process and taking a
Okay.
good hard look at it and saying, have you thought about this?
Yeah.
Did this element get caught when you guys were doing your risk assessment? Did someone think of this before it occurred? And then
Right.
chasing down each one of those rabbits and figuring out if all of your risks are actually managed. So not only will we take all the risks you identified, but we'll take all the ones we know about in that particular space and everything every one of our clients has ever seen in that particular space.
Yeah.
And test your configuration against those potential risks.
Interesting. So when we are talking about this configuration management and we're diving into this, I think one of the biggest things that you've talked about is having to create these standards and these procedures. So walk us through, how do you actually choose what a standard is, and then how do you give somebody the support to be able to actually implement that standard?
The number one finding in configuration management from a management perspective that I've ever seen on any audit that I've ever gone on. Now, keep in mind there are many, many potential findings, but we're talking about a management, not a technical
Okay.
finding. This number one finding is resourcing.
Interesting.
Not giving your technical staff the time or the money it takes to actually build the system you want them to build for the business process you've defined.
Oh, wow.
What I would say is that's the very first step. Does your
Okay.
technical team have enough bandwidth, enough
Yeah.
throughput to be able to consider and build the process you want, given the constraints of the time in which you need that process to be pushed out into the world?
Yeah.
That's probably the first thing you need to ask yourself when starting to talk about configuration management. It goes before the standard is even written.
Yeah.
But if you don't give your technical team enough time to do the work, if you don't give them enough resources to do the work, then that standard will never exist.
Right.
Then it literally is a process of just the documentation we've described. You build out what the process is going to look like.
Yep.
It's all paperwork. You build
Wow.
out the process of what it's going to look like, you evaluate the risks on each step, and you begin designing what you think that configuration is going to look like to cover all the pieces of the puzzle.
So then how do you go back and test this to see if it was effective?
Yeah, that's the beautiful part. If you follow a process that takes you logically through the build,
Right.
think of a Lego model,
Sure.
if you will. If you can follow the book of the process for each step along the way, then it becomes very easy, relatively speaking, to figure out what the testing needs to be to
Sure.
figure out if all the pieces are in place. Did you clip those two parts together like they were supposed to? Well, the answer is we can literally go back, look, and see specifically on that step, did you guys make that particular thing the way that you said you were going to make it?
Walk us through the training process so that somebody's able to help, create these standards and, ensure that with people in their organization, they're able to be trained appropriately to do this.
Standards creation it's no different than if you were doing a sales prospectus.
Okay.
It's the idea that what we want to do is commit a business action to paper.
Okay.
Only this is a technical business action that we're committing to paper. So the key element to that for me is actually training your IT staff in the business requirement
Wow.
that you have this documentation. It's getting the buy-in from, frankly, as an IT guy, I'll be very, very honest with you, we don't like doing paperwork.
Okay.
IT people are not constructively built to want to write down a whole bunch of standards. We're not
Sure.
really built to want to write down our procedures. But getting your IT staff to understand that part of the puzzle is
Yeah.
actually the key training requirement for building out good configuration standards.
Wow.
Your IT team needs to buy into the idea that when they do something, it needs to be documented, both their rationale for doing it and what they actually did.
You know, it's fascinating to dive into it, and I love the passion that you share. You know, without going through too much of the details, can you walk us through a time with a client that you were maybe surprised by what you found, or one of maybe your favorite audits that you've done just by the success that came out of it?
I think the one that sticks out to me the most was actually a successful audit. Not one with a ton of problems, but the reason there weren't tons of problems was really good configuration management.
Nice.
This was right when continuous integration and continuous development was becoming a practice. This idea that an organization is going to treat infrastructure like code.
Okay.
And they're going to write scripts that build servers. And watching this organization embrace that with scripts that actually included inline comments for every single security control. We do this because it cuts back to this risk. We have this piece of server build because it goes back to this place. It was a moment of revelation where the idea of that documentation in line and documentation in the moment became a reality for me. And to see the power of that was unbelievable. Suffice it to say that their servers tested very well when we went through all of the testing on all of their servers. And we were able to get a real rationale and a very good test plan around every single design element in their space. And when we found elements that they needed to consider, when we introduced additional risks, it was really easy for them to iterate forward on that and just simply add new risk considerations, add new configurations, and drive to what they were doing.
That's awesome. So one of the things I do want to bring up the fact is with technology, whether you go back 5 years, 10 years, 30 years, technology changes rapidly. We can probably expect the same for the future to see it evolve. How does that impact your job, and especially with configuration management?
It's funny. There's actually two schools of thought on that. And while I will agree with you that the underlying technologies that make a thing work rapidly iterate. 5 years ago, our vision of what the cloud computing environment is and could be was definitely not there yet. I mean, all of this has really occurred in the last decade. We've really started to understand the power of compute on demand and what a hybrid cloud environment really is and what the risks are for the cloud space, for example. All of this is brand new. But what I will tell you is that the fundamental underpinnings of all of this stuff is still the same. The concepts that underlie each one of these pieces of the puzzle. The technology may be new, but the need to secure it and the thought process of why we secure it is definitely still the same. So the same questions still lead us to those conclusions. It becomes an exercise in understanding what you're looking at and understanding what the output of a cloud space is to get to the same core concept. Things like, how do you guys manage change becomes a little different when it's change as code. But you're still managing change and the fundamentals are still there.
You know, it's really just so interesting to dive into this, and I want to invite you, for those of you who are joining us today, to be able to come back, ask us questions. If you're sitting down and saying, I'd love to know more about configuration management, I wish Shannon talked about this, please go to kirkpatrickprice.com/podcast, check the show notes to be able to submit your own questions for things that you do want to dive into. But with that being said, I'm sure you get a lot of questions about this role. So what are some of those common, maybe ideas that people have that are actually a misconception or questions that you get in your role?
I think my favorite one with configuration management is, why do I have to do change control? Why do you keep telling me change control is part of configuration management? We think of configuration management on the front end. I'm going to build a server. We're going to write down how I build that server. We're going to build it the same way every time. People think of configuration management in that space. But change management, for example, is a function of configuration management. We
Yep.
do change management so that we maintain our documentation, so that people slow down a little bit and think about the change that they're going to do in the context of the environment they're working in. And while change management itself is not writing a new configuration standard, every single change points back to the configuration standards and says, did you update that?
Yeah.
We made a fundamental change to how the system is going to work. Did you update the configuration standard to reflect the change that you made?
Yeah.
The funny thing about information security as a whole is there's an old joke about an elephant, and it goes, how do you eat an elephant?
You don't?
One bite at a time.
Oh.
These big coherent holes, these big coherent holes that we look at, information security is
Yeah.
overlapping controls. There's not a single domain of information security that doesn't overlap with at least 2 other domains of information security.
Sure.
Configuration for management, for example, leans straight into access control. You have to build the systems correctly to use access control, which then limits who can build the systems correctly, and you can see that there's this loop. The idea behind each one of these controls is it can be difficult to know where to start and where to finish because they are a big coherent bubble, and trying to look at each control in a vacuum is difficult.
Yeah.
So configuration management is configuring everything. It's configuring your Active Directory servers or your Amazon IAM environment or your Azure Active Directory environment or your Intune environment or your CloudWatch environment or your Route 53 service or your internal F5s or whatever it is that you happen to have. That's yours, has a build.
You know, we are almost, getting done to wrap up our time. I know you talked during this about your CISSP certification. You also talked earlier with me about another certification you're really proud of.
Yes.
Walk us through what that is and why you're proud of that.
I have a Radio Shack certification from back in the day when Radio Shack was in the 90s. Let's just say I'm old and back in the 90s. But Radio Shack certs at the time were not simple. When you hear the phrase Radio Shack certified person, today everybody looks at that and goes, oh, it's just another corporate certification. But imagine 26 books across a bookshelf that you had to pass a test for each one of those books, ranging from how do you size a resistor and understanding Ohm's law to how a computer is built in the 90s, to what are the parts that go into a ham radio, or how do people get ham radio licensing, or you get the idea. I'm incredibly proud of that cert to this day because even among Radio Shack employees, the actual number of people who finished the cert, I think when I left the organization, the number of people who had finished that cert was still around like 20 or 30% of all employees were the only people that ever finished it.
It's amazing.
And that cert at the time was considered to be A+ worthy. About the equivalent of an A+ certification. Really got you started in a career in technology.
Well, it's such a testament to your knowledge as well to be able to adapt so quickly with whatever technology was then, was 10 years ago, is today, and whatever the future will be. So Shannon, I do want to say thank you so much for sitting down with us today on our cybersecurity mission. I hope you had fun.
I did.
Would you do this again?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, for those of you who are saying, Shannon, no, please don't go, what I want you to do is head to kirkpatrickprice.com/podcast. Make sure you can download the resources there, but you can also ask questions that you want Shannon to answer in the future or other topics that we can cover. So Shannon, thank you so much. My name is Allie Krings, and we'll chat with you guys again soon on our cybersecurity mission.
When you work with a Kirkpatrick Price cybersecurity auditor, you work with someone who's been in your shoes. Let's see what the next expert is ready to share to support you in your cybersecurity mission.
Hi, my name is Jason Kent. I'm a senior information security auditor with Kirkpatrick Price. Take a minute and just imagine with me your IT systems as a medieval castle. A formidable fortress with high, strong walls, but with a old wooden door and secret passageways to the perimeter. System hardening is like going and finding these secret passageways, closing them, going to the door and reinforcing your doors and your gates. This reducing the attack surface makes it much harder for bad actors to gain a foothold in your systems. Excellent resources for finding hardening information would include the Center for Information Security, CIS benchmarks, and also vendors best practices for security and configuration of their products.
Today's episode highlights the need for configuration management to achieve our challenging compliance goals. Your systems need to be configured based on industry hardening standards to withstand attack. Are you ready to join a community of 10,000 people who are working together to elevate the standards for cybersecurity and compliance? It's free to sign up at kirkpatrickprice.com/podcast or check the show notes and achieve greater levels of assurance today. Thanks for joining us on our cybersecurity mission.